Earlier, we talked about business ethics and how our individual values play a role in our industry codes. Sometimes we have a tendency to judge the actions of another realtor based on our own values, even though those values are not spelled out in the Code of Ethics. Remember what happened between Paul and Angel. While Paul's conduct was unprofessional, there is nothing in the Code of Ethics that addresses his conduct, which means he cannot be found in violation. It's important to realize that the code cannot include everything you want it to include. Do you know what is ethical and what is not? Time to test your knowledge to see how well we know the Code of Ethics.
We ask realtors to write us with situations they've experienced firsthand or heard about. Situations that may or may not be violations of the code. Listen closely to each one and be ready to decide if you think the Code of Ethics has been violated. Now here's the first one. It's called access to property. I have a very motivated buyer I cannot keep up with no matter how hard I try. It's like she wants to see every property on the market. I finally decided to give her a list of properties with the lockbox access codes, a key to my office in case she needed my key card, and told her to go for it. The homes were all vacant, so I didn't see a problem with it. I told her to call me if she found something she liked. I got an angry call from a listing broker who said I had no business giving the buyer access to properties. She would if it had been her, believe you me. Is this a possible violation of the Code of Ethics? What do you think? Again, pause the program here if you'd like to discuss it before we give the answer. The answer is yes. Standard of Practice 3-9 became effective January 1st, 2010. It states that realtors shall not provide access to listing property on terms other than those established by the owner or the listing broker.
Here's another letter from a realtor. It involves going to the seller's lender. Listen closely and be ready to decide if this is a violation of the code. There are several offers on a short sale property my buyer wants to purchase. My buyer is very anxious because there are a number of buyers competing for the same property. She feels by making a full price cash offer, she should be the top contender for the property. She presented a full price cash offer on another short sale and a less attractive offer was accepted. This time, she wants to make sure the lender sees her offer and wants me to go directly to the lender. I don't see this as a problem since I am not going directly to the listing broker's seller. Is this a possible violation of the Code of Ethics? The answer is yes. Standard of Practice 16-13 clearly states that all dealings concerning property that is exclusively listed shall be carried on with the client's representative. Therefore, if a cooperating sales associate decides to bypass the listing sales associate, he or she could be in violation of the code.
Letter number 3, modifying the offer of compensation. Broker Sally's buyer was very impressed with Sally's hard work in trying to negotiate a very difficult transaction and feels Sally should be compensated above what the listing broker offered in the MLS. The buyer asks Sally to include in the offer the buyer's request for the seller to compensate Sally an additional X% over what the listing broker offered in the MLS. The listing broker is furious and feels broker Sally is trying to modify the offer of compensation, which is clearly a violation of Article 16, Standard of Practice 16-16. Is this a possible violation of the Code of Ethics? The answer is no, it is not a violation. Standard of Practice 16-16 states, realtors acting as buyer representatives shall not use the terms of the offer to purchase to modify the listing broker's offer of compensation. The standard of practice is very specific about modifying the listing broker's offer of compensation. There is nothing that precludes the buyer from asking the seller to pay additional compensation to the buyer's sales associate as a seller concession. The seller retains the right to refuse to pay the additional compensation. Either way, the listing broker's offer of compensation still stands. Broker Sally would not be in violation of the Code of Ethics because the request to increase hinges on whether or not the buyer and seller agree that the additional compensation should be paid. Mary Beth, what's your next letter about?
This time we're dealing with disclaimers accompanying solicitations. Realtor Fred exclusively works the Greenbrier subdivision and has a number of listings in that area. Fred was furious when Realtor George mailed out prospecting solicitations to all of the residents in the Greenbrier area. George knew that this was Fred's area in the first place, so he is supposed to include a disclaimer that states, if you are currently listed with another sales associate, please disregard. This is an obvious violation of the Code of Ethics. Is this a possible violation of the code based on the face of the complaint? The answer is no. There is no requirement in the Code of Ethics that requires a realtor who chooses to market to a particular geographic area to include a disclaimer. Phil?
This one is titled, My Buyer Was Contacted by the Listing Sales Associate. I've been working with my buyer Eunice for years, and recently we started looking at properties because Eunice is ready to downsize. I told Eunice I would be out of town for a couple of days and would be back on Wednesday. On Tuesday, Eunice spotted an open house and the listing sales associate showed her the property. Eunice told the listing sales associate she was working with me. The sales associate continued to work with Eunice and wrote the offer that was accepted. I feel it is unethical for the listing sales associate to continue to work with my buyer after my buyer told her she was working with me. Is this a code violation? The answer is no. The old saying, no one owns the buyer, is true. Most listing sales associates will contact the buyer's sales associate when they realize the buyer is working with another sales associate. Even if the buyer is subject to an exclusive agreement, the listing sales associate can work with the buyer if the buyer initiates contact and wants the listing sales associate to provide substantive services, such as writing the contract. The listing sales associate would not be in violation of the code in this instance.
Okay, what happens when there is a change in the offer of compensation? I started working on a listing, and the offer of compensation was X% in the MLS. I submitted my offer and found out the offer of compensation had changed. The listing broker changed the offer before my offer was submitted. I didn't think it was necessary to check the MLS on a daily basis. It doesn't matter anyway. I should be paid what was offered in the MLS at the time negotiations began. I think this is a violation of the Code of Ethics. What do you think? Is it a violation? The answer is no. As long as the change is communicated prior to the offer being submitted, the listing broker has not violated the Code of Ethics.
We have time for 2 more letters. This one starts out, the terms of my offer were broadcast to the sales associates of competing buyers. Realtor Rob was furious when he found out that Realtor Sam had shared with the other competing buyer sales associate the terms of his buyer's offer. Realtor Sam told Realtor Rob he was trying to get the highest and best offer for his seller. These terms are confidential, and Rob is going to file an ethics complaint against Realtor Sam. Is this a possible violation of the code? Actually, it's not. Standard of Practice 1-13, number 5, states that realtors who represent the buyer should put the buyer on notice that the seller or the seller's representative may not treat the existence, terms, or conditions of offers as confidential unless there is a confidentiality agreement between the parties. If you're a listing broker, it's a good idea to discuss with the seller how the seller wants multiple offers handled, and if the seller wants you to disclose the terms and conditions of competing offers with cooperating brokers.
Our last letter involves the Elusive listing sales associate. I submitted an offer over 2 weeks ago, and the listing sales associate has disappeared into thin air. He doesn't call me back, email me, nothing. I tried calling the broker, and all I get is the runaround from the mystery person who answers the telephone. My buyer thinks I'm inept because I can't find out what has happened to his offer. If I don't find out something soon, the buyer is going to walk. I can't contact the seller or I'll be in violation of the code. I think it's a violation of the code that this broker and his sales associate won't communicate the status of my offer. Is this a possible violation of the Code of Ethics? Well, no, it's not. This is a dilemma realtors face on a daily basis. Even though the listing broker and sales associate are being unprofessional, they are not in violation of the code of ethics.